The former president is online tonight promoting a new cryptocurrency venture. Just moments ago, however, he was asked about yesterday's incident.
This was the second attempt in your life in under 2 months. What do you make of that?
Well, there's a lot of rhetoric going on.
Right.
A lot of people think that the Democrats, when they talk about threat to democracy and all of this, and it seems that both of these people were radical lefts.
Well, that was the former president just moments ago. Here's his running mate also tonight, also pointing the finger at his political opposition.
You know, the big difference between conservatives and liberals is that no one has tried to kill Kamala Harris in the last couple of months, and two people now have tried to kill Donald Trump in the last couple of months. I'd say that's pretty strong evidence that the left needs to tone down the rhetoric and needs to cut this crap out.
Well, the day began, as you know, along similar lines in a similar tone. Talking off camera to Fox Digital, the former president directly blamed the president and vice president's rhetoric, quoting him now, "Their rhetoric is causing me to be shot at." He added, and I quote, "They use highly inflammatory language." He said, "I can use it too, far better than they can, but I don't." A bit later, he posted this on social media, quoting again, "The rhetoric lies as exemplified by the false statements made by Comrade Kamala Harris during the rigged and highly partisan ABC debate and all of the ridiculous lawsuits specifically designed to inflict damage on Joe's, then Kamala's political opponent, me, has taken politics in our country to a whole new level of hatred, abuse, and distrust. Because of this communist left rhetoric, the bullets are flying and will only get worse." Joining us now is former Harris Communications Director Ashley Etienne, Republican strategist Brad Todd, and CNN senior data reporter Harry Enten. Brad, obviously, Vice President Vance went on to say that he'd do his best to tone down the rhetoric. Do you think it's really a genuine promise, given what we just heard him say and what the former president has certainly said in terms of contributing to very heated rhetoric?
Well, you know, since Donald Trump came down the elevator in 2016, Democrats have constantly said that the Constitution would be shredded, the country would end. He was a threat to democracy. Hakeem Jeffries' favorite expression to him is he's a clear and present danger. And, you know, a lot of political rhetoric is heated, but I do think it's time for everybody to agree that the country will still be here in January, no matter who's inaugurated as the next president. And I think that that's missing when Democrats talk about Donald Trump. The country's going to survive. Criticize him on his policies, his tax cut, his border policies, his tariff plan, but perhaps don't say the country's going to end if he wins.
But, Brad, you know that the former president has repeatedly said the country will end, that there won't be a country if Kamala Harris is elected. I mean, that's been a recurring line of his.
There's no question Donald Trump himself has to tone down his rhetoric, and I say that on this network all the time. But let's be very clear that many Democrats have never accepted that he was legitimately elected in 2016. They think that there's no possible way they can allow him to be elected this time. And, you know, I've been in politics a long time, Anderson, and if you turn back the clock to 2011, when Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was shot in Tucson, the New York Times immediately blamed conservative rhetoric for her being shot. It took them 6 years to retract that. So I think we have a double standard going on here.
Ashley, President Biden, Vice President Harris were quick to condemn any kind of political violence. And as we mentioned, President Biden and former President Trump had a cordial phone call today. But certainly there has been, you know, a lot of heated rhetoric on both sides.
I don't know that I would agree that there's a lot of heated rhetoric on both sides, but let's go back to the point that was just made about that escalator. Let's go back to that escalator where President Trump, former President Trump, said that Mexicans were rapists. You know, there's one thing about Trump, and that is he's incredibly consistent. If you go all the way back to the 80s, when he said the Central Park Five needed to die, they should be hung. You know, back to the escalator to today where he's talking about immigrants are poisoning the blood of America. I mean, his current vice presidential candidate called him America's Hitler for this reason. So here's my real concern is that there is an audience that these two gentlemen are playing to. The 48% of the American public that believe that this stuff is okay. You know, I've moved away from Republicans sort of disavowing this language. I mean, I have no faith in them anymore, but I definitely have faith in the American people. That's my main concern. As a black person and as a woman woman who's raising a young black daughter. That is my concern, is that 48% is stubbornly thinking that this type of rhetoric and the president's actions are acceptable, that they're okay. And then he sends out a fundraising notice, a letter today with 3 words in it, and that's fight, fight, fight. To your point, Anderson, continuing to amp up the rhetoric. So that's really the concern, is that there's an audience and they're playing to it. And so if Trump wins, it's going to say more about us than it will about him.
Harry, where does the race stand right now?
You know, if this were a popular vote election, I would sit here with you tonight and say that Kamala Harris was the favorite. She has a clear lead in the national polls. It's small, but it's clear and it's pretty consistent, especially after this last debate. But the bottom line is, we're talking about 7 battleground states where this election will be decided. And the margin there is very, very small. I mean, you could see it up on your screen. It's basically, you know, Kamala Harris by what, 0.3 percentage points? That's well within any margin of error. So the bottom line is, I have no idea who's going to win the race at this particular point. It is the closest election of my lifetime, and I believe anyone's lifetime who's on this panel.
Brad, I mean, do you believe? I mean, you've said Donald Trump needs to tone down his rhetoric, and you said Democrats as well. Do you actually think this is going to happen? I mean, or is this just the way politics is going to be from now on?
Well, I certainly hope not, Anderson. You know, and Donald Trump doesn't get much credit when he does tone down his rhetoric. You know, he also said today that we want people to come to our country. We want them to come legally. He doesn't get much credit for that. And I'm not going to defend Donald Trump's rhetoric. He certainly is out of line plenty. But I think we have to realize that, yes, our country's polarized, and yes, we have great disagreements with each other. We ought to try to criticize each other on policy and talk about what might happen if those policies were enacted or not, and perhaps agree that maybe the other side has people that have good motives and bad ideas.
Certainly, social media has played a role in the rise in this rhetoric, Ashley. I mean, it's made it a lot easier to kind of just throw, you know, a Molotov cocktail into a conversation. You know, Elon Musk posted yesterday saying no one is even trying to assassinate Biden/Kamala with a thinking face emoji. He then deleted that post and later claimed it was just a joke.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, people are getting all of this stuff in their feeds, and there's disinformation and misinformation even perpetuated by foreign agents that's really compounding the situation here. But I definitely agree with my Republican friend on the panel that, you know, we should be attacking each other on policies. We need to get back to the time where we could really fight about the substance of trying to elevate and put the American people in a position where they can thrive. But the problem is Donald Trump has no policies. He has no substance. As he said in the debate, he has concepts. So we can't argue about policy when the other side doesn't have any policies, and he's totally gutted out the Republican Party. I'm not sure what they stand for any longer, but that's really the problem here, is that they have no policies, they have no substance, they have no positions. So what they fall back on is, again, this, you know, rhetoric that divides America even more so. That frustrates the divides that we currently have in the nation, rather than trying to bring us together and move us forward.
Harry, was there any polling, a meaningful shift after the last attempt on the former president?
No, there wasn't. Remember, that was Trump versus Biden. But the bottom line is, you looked at the polls before the assassination attempt, and then you looked at him afterwards a week later, and what you saw was Donald Trump was leading that race by about 3 points beforehand, and then he was leading by about 3 points afterward. The bottom line is, these races have been either between Biden and Trump or Harris and Trump, very, very consistent. I'm not expecting much movement this time around, but of course, Anderson, you never know.
There's new questions about whether the suspected gunman acted alone. Investigators at this hour now racing to determine if the man accused of apparently trying to assassinate Trump had help. A gunman who authorities say was in a sniper's nest for about 12 hours before readying his AK-47 style rifle to kill. And tonight, we have the moment of his arrest on tape. In this brand new body cam video, you see Ruth there with his hands up, walking backwards towards police. They have their weapons drawn. You hear the officers yelling, "Keep walking, walk straight back." There he is. Then they quickly handcuff him, as you're watching here, take him into custody. Now, Florida Sheriff, who you are going to hear from, I'm going to speak to in just a moment, says that Ruth never asked why he got pulled over. Said he was, quote, calm, as if he was going to dinner. We'll speak to him in just a moment. But at this moment, authorities say they are pursuing warrants for Ruth's phone, his car, electronics. The FBI is calling the apparent attempted assassination, quote, extremely serious. And at this hour, the acting director of the Secret Service telling reporters that he has now spoken directly to the former president, Donald Trump. We have a lot to get to tonight. I want to begin with Paula Reed. She is near Mar-a-Lago. And Paula, where do things stand right now?
Well, good evening, Erin. At this point, we expect that investigators could file additional charges against Ruth, depending on what they uncover during those interviews you mentioned, and as well as from those search warrants. He currently faces 2 counts, one of possessing a firearm as a convicted felon, and a second of possessing a firearm with an obliterated serial number. But as they gather more evidence, they will be able to determine what other charges they could successfully bring against him. Now, he was in court earlier today in this federal courthouse behind me, and he didn't say much during his hearing. He was asked a series of questions by the magistrate judge. He just nodded and said, "Yes, Judge," a few times. But Erin, he will be back in court next Monday for a detention hearing. And we expect the prosecutors are going to argue that he must remain detained ahead of a likely trial. They will argue that not only is he a flight risk, but they will say he is also a danger to the community. And then he will be formally arraigned on September 30th. Erin?
All right, Paula, thank you very much. And, you know, Ralph, it turns out, has had many brushes with the law, a long list of charges against him. So exactly what are those? Who is he? Kyung La has more.
To many who have encountered Ryan Ruth, it's not shocking that he is suspected of attempting to kill a former president.
What's your name, Austin? Ryan?
Former Greensboro, North Carolina Police Sergeant Tracy Falk, who once charged Ruth, says he was well known to her department.
We used to get what we call barometer reports, which are kind of like dangerous persons who had made threats either against elected officials, police officers, or community members. And we had gotten several alerts, barometer reports on Ryan Ruth, so I knew who he was.
Ruth had a long list of charges against him in the early 2000s, including a serious incident that started as a traffic stop, but ended with Ruth barricaded in a business.
He reached over into the center seat and opened a black duffel bag, and there was a gun laying in there. And he kind of held his hand over the bag for a second as I'm backing up and issuing commands, and then he just put the car in gear and drove 2 businesses down and pulled in his business and ran inside.
Ruth would plead guilty to possession of a weapon of mass destruction. A source tells CNN it was for having an automatic weapon. A father of 3, Ruth moved from that troubled past in North Carolina to Hawaii, where he started something called Camp Box, working on tiny homes for homeless people, and demonstrated how he built them on his website. In 2018, a local station interviewed him during a flood.
We had building materials under the house, so all the lumber under the house started floating out into the yard.
Ruth claimed to have local political ambitions. He launched a website to run for mayor in his town, but never officially filed. Instead, he wrote on the website and across various social media platforms about another passion, the war in Ukraine, tweeting the same message more than a dozen times in one day. But the keyboard wasn't enough.
Got here this morning.
Ruth went to the region, arriving wearing a Hawaiian lei. Once in Kyiv, he spent weeks talking to reporters.
My initial goal was to come fight. I'm 56, so initially they were like, well, I have no military experience, so they're like, you're not an ideal candidate.
Instead, Ruth set up camp in a main square.
Putin is a terrorist, and he needs to be ended, so we need everybody from around the globe to stop what they're doing and come here now.
I think more emotional for me is just talking to the guys that have come here. You know, when you talk to a 20-year-old guy that sold everything he owns to come here to fight, that is heroism.
This singularly driven man is who journalist Michael Washura met.
I don't find it difficult to believe that he would take it upon himself to attempt to assassinate Donald Trump.
Washura met Ruth several times that year, describing him as eccentric and dedicated to big global causes.
This is about a center to help people when they come from other countries around the world.
This is someone who was very committed to causes that he believed in, demonstrated a willingness to sacrifice personal comfort and convenience in order to further those causes.
How does all of this now weave into the profile of someone who might take a semi-automatic rifle onto a golf course?
Ryan was not a normal guy. there's something about the combination of the times and the person that makes something like this not just possible, but not surprising.
Because looking back, Washira says there were so many clues.
I'm not sure that the world is as wonderful as I once thought it was. I had thought that everyone would respond, very generously and unselfishly, and it seems like that would be a no-brainer, but I increasingly get more disappointed in humanity.
Many people CNN spoke with described Ruth as erratic, manic, even delusional, especially when it came to the effort in Ukraine. He had this idea that you could bring in soldiers from Afghanistan to come into Ukraine to fight. But his son obviously has a very different view, Aaron. When we reached out to him, his son texted back, quote, "It doesn't sound like the man I know to do anything crazy, much less violent." Aaron?
All right, Kyung, thank you very much.
Extremely serious. That's how the FBI describes yesterday's apparent attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. The agency saying it's determined to provide answers to what led up to the events that took place as the former President of the United States was playing a round of golf. Susan Rice is joining us right now. She served as President Biden's domestic policy advisor as well as national security advisor in the Obama administrations. Susan, thanks so much for joining us. You know well the threats our country's leaders face. You worked in the White House for years with presidents. You worked very closely with the Secret Service. How do you assess the way the Secret Service handled this second assassination attempt against Trump?
Well, Wolf, before I answer that, I think it's critical to say that what happened yesterday and what happened in July is horrible. There really is no place in this country for political violence. Vice President Harris and President Biden have been absolutely clear about that. Their administration is one that exactly 2 years ago held an unprecedented bipartisan summit at the White House called United Against hate-fueled violence and this kind of political violence. So they have been cognizant of this concern for a long time, and it is absolutely unacceptable and unconscionable. The Secret Service has said in their own estimation, and obviously it's very early hours after the attempt, that they think their systems worked, and clearly the gunman was not able to get off shots. The Secret Service apprehended him, and that all appears to be good. But clearly this needs further investigation, further understanding. I have had great experience with the Secret Service. I have myself been a protectee. I have enormous respect and admiration for the men and women of the Secret Service. They are under enormous strain and duress, and I think President Biden was absolutely correct in not only reaching out to former President Trump today, as he did in July via phone call, but also in calling on Congress to provide the Secret Service with the resources it needs as the demands on it continue to increase.
Yeah, I spent 7 years as a White House correspondent and work closely with the Secret Service, and I'm grateful for all that they do. So important indeed. Donald Trump, as you know, Susan, is blaming President Biden and Vice President Harris, claiming the suspect in this particular case acted based on their rhetoric, referring to Biden and Harris. How do you respond to that claim from Trump?
I mean, it's extraordinarily disappointing and irresponsible, perhaps not surprising. This is not something that should be politicized. This is not something that should be a subject for fundraising or for raising the temperature and inciting violence. There is nothing that President Biden or Vice President Harris have done that would in any way, shape, or form lead to violence against Donald Trump. That's just unfair and despicable. But really, that's not the point. The point here is, that we are living in times when, the temperature has gone way up. There are real threats out there, and our leaders have a responsibility to bring down the temperature. That's precisely what Vice President Harris and President Biden are doing and have done consistently. They understand that responsible leadership calls for sobriety, calls for unity, bringing people together, not fear-mongering, not hateful rhetoric, not divisive rhetoric that pits one American against another. and I wish we would hear the same out of former President Trump.
On this other story we're following, as you know, Springfield, Ohio is now dealing with bomb and shooting threats in the wake of these false claims from Trump and Senator J.D. Vance that Haitian immigrants are eating pets in Springfield, Ohio. What do you make of this, all of this?
I mean, it's horrific. And that kind of, blatant lies, which they continue to feed, knowing that they're untrue, is really an example of what I was just saying, an effort to stoke fear and hatred and division, and to attack innocent people in this country, Haitians who are here predominantly, the vast majority of them legally, as your reporting said, legally. And this, to me, raises a much wider concern, which if you really listen to what J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are saying, they are talking about taking mass action against Americans who are in this country legally, American citizens. Now, we're talking about, first of all, these Haitians who are here legally. They're immigrants. Donald Trump said on Friday that he wants to send Haitians who are here legally back to Venezuela, of all places. But this is part of a larger picture. Recall that Stephen Miller, who was former President Trump's one of his closest advisors, his immigration guy, and still a very close advisor, said that under the Trump administration, they had begun a project on denaturalization. And he said in 2025, that project will be turbocharged. Understand what that means, Wolf. That means that American citizens who have been naturalized, and there are millions of them in this country, can be denaturalized and forced to leave the country. That is a frightening agenda. It's terrifying that there is a plan to take away citizenship from Americans who have lawfully earned that citizenship, who are law-abiding, tax-paying, husbands, wives, children's parents in this country, ripping families apart because they don't like where those people came from. That is not the country we are. We are a nation of immigrants, many of us, and that kind of divisive and demonization of whole swaths of our population put millions of American citizens at risk. And this is really the agenda that scares me the most.
And Sheriff, I know you were on the scene as your officers arrested the suspect. So, as you were there watching all of this, I know you've commented that the suspect was calm, but what else can you share about his demeanor and how he behaved in that moment?
Well, good evening, Aaron. First of all, you have to picture the scene was chaotic. Traffic stopped, northbound, southbound, 15, 20 armed deputies, body armor, guns, helicopter overhead, canine. He was nonplussed, would be the way I would describe it. His facial affect was relatively flat. He was engaged, you could tell he was alert, knew what was going on, but yet he never asked, well, what is this about? What's going on? The normal thing you would expect, even from guilty people, oftentimes try to put it on a front, but not him. He just sat there as calm as if he was getting ready to go to a late night church service.
I mean, it's really incredible to imagine, as you say, as calm as if he was getting ready to go to a late night church service. Just to contrast that, with the moment, you talk about the chaos in that moment, what's going on with the traffic. Let me just play again the moment he was apprehended. This is, of course, off the body cam footage, Sheriff.
2 steps to your right. Take 2 steps to your right. Driver, walk straight back.
Yep. You want to go with
Keep walking.
What's your name, Austin? Ryan?
And Sheriff, obviously you're there watching that. Handcuffs go on, say your name. He says, Ryan, that's a little bit hard to hear, but the officer repeats it. Did the suspect say anything when he was taken into custody or in the police car afterwards, Sheriff?
No, another odd thing, he didn't. He never even asked, what is this about? And in the abundance of caution, we knew this. Look, this was as high a profile stop as we could ever have. So we kept one of our body-worn cameras on him at all times. So we have recorded him not saying anything. We kept the door open. This is an FBI investigation. We certainly didn't want to start asking questions or do anything with the car. We stabilized the scene. The FBI and the Secret Service got there pretty quickly, and we turned Ruth over to them.
Sheriff, I know there was a witness who was very central in this. He was the one who, when the Secret Service shot at that protruding rifle, caused Ruth to flee. And then he gets in his SUV and he drives, right? And then you guys apprehend. But this witness was crucial because he sees the guy get in the car. He takes a picture of the car with the license that ends up being so important for you to be able to locate the car. Do you know anything about this witness?
I don't know anything about him personally, but I know this. It was heroic for him to do. He puts himself at some risk and takes a picture. We get the picture. The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office does a phenomenal job. Immediately, we're the county to the north, gives us the picture, and within about 15 minutes, we're able to spot the vehicle, corroborate the tag, and make the stop. Then they fly the witness to the scene using the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office helicopter. He makes the positive ID. And really, as far as we're concerned, that's the best ending that could have happened.
Well, so they literally helicoptered him to your location so that he could put his actual eyes on Ryan Ruth.
Sure, yeah. We had to make sure, the FBI had to make sure. We did due diligence. Look, this is a big case. You've been talking about the U.S. Attorney General's, the U.S. Attorney's Office. They don't want local law enforcement making a mistake, and we did not. We gave them a pristine case. We handed him off intact without harming their case in any way.
Now, I know that the license that the witness took the picture of was so central to you. When did you first identify and where that license was? I mean, in terms of cameras that you might have had on the route, or how did you actually ascertain that's where this vehicle is with this license plate?
It's funny, Aaron, with all the technology and the license plate readers and all the mystical things that law enforcement oftentimes have, we got that car because my road deputy sitting at the Palm City exit on I-95 saw the vehicle, didn't see the tag, saw the vehicle, and got on the radio. I was listening, of course, and advised, hey, I think I've got the vehicle. We have a technique here. We don't just blue light a car and risk a chase. We actually have heavy-duty trucks with big front-end bumpers. We positioned our vehicle, eased him off the interstate, gave him no opportunity to run. He gave us no opportunity to have to use any force. And fortunately, we were able to shut it down and make it come out just right.
And did he do anything after your officer at that exit sees him? Was the car going extra fast? And did he try to do anything evasive, or just driving normally and then just pulled over with nothing?
Now I'll go back to my church analogy. He not only acted like he was getting ready to go to a late night Sunday church service, he drove like it. He was obeying the speed limit. It was able to let us get into position and get him stopped. I don't think he knew we were there. The road patrol car, our technique, stay back, don't spook him into a chase, because then you risk the citizens, the motorists.
Yeah.
Back away, we get the unmarked in there, the big trucks, and just pinch him off, get him off the interstate. We're known for that here, Aaron. You can't go through Martin County and come out the other end if you're a bad guy without getting caught.
Did you get the sense, Sheriff, from seeing him, and I know you talk about how he behaved so calmly, like he's on the way to a church service, but when you actually saw him and you were there, and you were there as this arrest happened, that he was alone, or there was anyone else involved? I mean, I don't know, was he on his phone, or what was your feeling on this sense of whether he's a lone wolf or not?
Well, that's a tall order to extrapolate from what we saw, whether he was a lone wolf or not. He was alone then when we caught him, but before that, after that, leading up to it, I think, of course, I've been asked all day, what's the first question I would want to answer? I think the question is, did you operate alone, Ruth? Did you engage in some conspiracy? Did somebody send you down here? That would be the biggest deal. Because if that's not the case, we have the only person involved. Former President Trump can go back to his activities and know there's not a lone wolf out there that got away from law enforcement.
Sheriff, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with all of us. Thank you, Sheriff Snyder.
Sure, and it's been a pleasure. Good night.
All right, you too, sir. And next, the blame game that's going on. Of course, Trump has been pointing the finger at Biden and Harris for the attempted shooting, the White House slamming Elon Musk for questioning.
So, John, first of all, what do you make of what we've learned today and where things stand?
Well, I think what we learned today was they're going backwards through all of his things. But there were a couple of interesting points. Number one, as Randy reported, there's that 12-hour capture of his cell phone. The wording is interesting. In the vicinity of the area. It suggests two different things. First thing is he used the cover of darkness the night before to get through the bushes to the fence line, do his reconnaissance as to what's the best place to set up, and then he'd lay in wait there. The other alternative is that he set up his GoPro there, set it to a streaming setting, and then went back across the street where there's many commercial places and parking lots, and just, settled into.
That's an important point. I mean, in that area, right across the street, there's a parking lot. There's places he could sit in his car if he wanted to, or in a Starbucks or something.
Lots of places. There's a gas station. There's a Burger King. There's a library. There's a school. There's a big empty parking lot. There's a 7-Eleven. So within that block on Summit Boulevard there's everything. The question is, the special agent in charge, Veltri, said his phone was detected very close to that tree line where he fired from. But, when you're doing tower triangulations for a signal, there's a difference that can vary from a couple of 100 feet to a place. It could have been across the street. I think what they're going to end up doing, though, is going backwards through that phone triangulation and say, how many other days was he there? Was he building the surveillance?
Jonathan, I mean, in terms of, there's questions, well, if this wasn't on the schedule, and we heard that from the acting Secret Service director, would he have just been this alleged assassin would this have been the first time he'd done that? Would he have scoped this area out? If he was sitting in that parking lot, would he have been able to see the motorcade of the former president coming to that golf club resort and then having an hour before he got to that spot?
Let's unpack that a little bit. The reference to an OTR, an off-the-record movement, really is playing to the Secret Service advantage of surprise. You don't know that a protectee is going to be there. But that's not the case with Donald Trump. You only know that he is a creature of habit. You know if he has nothing on his schedule at Mar-a-Lago, there is a high probability that he's going to play golf. So it doesn't take a sophisticated assassin to understand that behavioral trait.
If he's in town and it's a Sunday and he's not doing anything officially.
You're going to hedge. I'm going to hedge and I'm going to go to that location. Because where else does he go in the area? He really doesn't travel outside of Mar-a-Lago in his controlled environments. That's where he spends his time.
And if he was just watching from the outside, he would have seen a motorcade coming in, and he still would have had, from the time Trump got there to getting to that hole on the golf course, it would have been more than an hour.
Well over an hour. So again, into Commissioner Miller's point, I think that as I go through this, the digital exhaust here, and there is just volumes of digital evidence here, we're going to see that this individual was probably hiding in plain sight, over at that Starbucks across the street. You're going to see a lot of pre-attack surveillance in the 12 hours or so beforehand, but on previous days. And what we haven't heard yet, what other locations was he potentially looking at? Was he looking at areas around Mar-a-Lago as well? Again, it's not normal for somebody just to wake up and go, well, I'm going to go kill the former president today. There has been a lot that has been manifesting within this individual individual. There's a lot around the motivation and intent that he had to launch this attack. So as this investigation, pulls the mosaic of evidence together, we're going to start getting a clearer picture.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll have more with the panel afterwards. I want to take up the question of how the suspect has been charged so far and what the prospects may be of additional charges against him. It's just gun charges so far.